On March 5th, 2023, Dragon Ball Battle Hour, one of the most popular and notorious events that's hosted for everything Dragon Ball related for video games. That day, people were expecting the same old updates for Dokkan and Kakarot, but on that day was when the entire Dragon Ball community blew up from this one trailer. And from that one trailer alone, everyone knew that the Budokai Tenkaichi series has returned. Today, I'm going to be discussing Dragon Ball Sparking Zero 1 year later. On this day, on October 11th, 2024, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was released around the world. For me, I was able to play the game on the 8th due to the fact that I pre-ordered the deluxe edition of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. And way before that, people have been basically fell in love with Dragon Ball Sparking Zero because die-hard Dragon Ball fans had waited 16 years for a new Budokai Tenkaichi game. And were they satisfied? There was basically the answer of yes and no. There were a lot of things that was bad with the launch, and from that came history. The game went through some ups and downs, despite the fact that it had lack of offline content, including lack of costumes, lack of offline modes like arcade and other stuff that was in the previous Budokai Tenkaichi games. And along with that, there weren't that many characters that didn't make the cut that was in the previous game, such as Demon King Piccolo, Kid Chi-Chi, Grandpa Gohan, General Blue, and so on. Even the GOAT himself, Super 17, didn't make the cut. But there was some also dark stuff ahead for Sparking Zero. There were some dark times. There was two sides of the community. There was one side of the community where people say that the game did absolutely perfect and it was worth the 16-year wait, and there was another side where people saying that this game basically disgraced the entire series and its predecessor. And during this time of the launch of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero in that 1 year mark, the game went through some lot of changes. Despite the game's smooth combat system and beautiful graphics, but there was still some darkness in between the Sparking Zero's gameplay that made it far from perfect. For example, the game was basically a cheese fest, meaning that there were a lot of characters that had the ability to go into their, and I quote, instant spark, which caused them to go into their high tension. That's what it was originally called in Budokai Tenkaichi games. And with that, they were able to use this mechanic where they can infinitely spam Ki Blast, and once they get close enough, they can use their ultimate. This was basically revolutionized in ranked to the point where people called it the sparking cheese. This mechanic was basically thought was going to be the end, and many people agreed that this was going to be the end of Sparking Zero, considering the fact that, well, it was kind of cheese. You had the ability to wait for your stocks to come back, then instant spark, spam a couple of Ki Blasts till you get close enough to them, and pop your ultimate, depending on what ultimate you have, if it's unblockable or not, and easy GG for you. But that was not the only mechanics. Fusion characters with extra health stocks. Those character archetypes started to take over Sparking Zero online, and ranked and even in player match, depending on if you find a quick play warrior playing those characters. The characters you'll basically will run around and see 90% of the time in Sparking Zero will be full power Jiren, UI Goku, Beerus and Whis, giants basically like Dr. Wheelo or even Janemba, depending on if they're good or basically a spammer, and the most notorious character of all time to see online, Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. During that time, it was a dark age and a dark time for the Sparking Zero community because those characters were running amok. And for that, the meta was absolutely toxic and atrocious to the point where you will see full power Jiren users use instant spark and spam key blast to lock you in place to use their unblockable ultimate cheese. Super Saiyan 4 Gogetas spamming Wild Sense to get the upper hand and win all of the Vanish Wars. And of course, the most notorious of all, Super Vegito and its unblockable, unstoppable after image strike bullshit. But despite the cons and basically the dark side of the Sparking Zero gameplay, the Sparking Zero video games themselves sold a lot of copies to the point where it was basically announced that it sold almost 1 million and within less than a week. The game itself was popping off. People were saying that this game was definitely a must-buy for people who are fans of the anime or just want to play and duke it out with their friends or family. If you just want some offline casual stuff. But despite its, great sales, there was still some dark and terrible things about the game. But it's not really hard to address the big elephant in the room. For once, the gameplay. There was a lot of broken features on it. A lot. For example, like I said, characters like UI Goku, the fusions, they were so powerful that characters that basically were underwhelming or basically underleveled had the disadvantage. That's like me wanting to play Master Roshi in rank and I go up against a Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. I have 2 health stocks and he has 4. Basically, I'm fighting a goddamn boss battle. And guess who's gonna win? Of course, Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. It's like what Frieza said in the anime when he was fighting against the Z Warriors. When your ants battle a dinosaur, who do you think will emerge as the victor? And people were basically irritated by the fact that this was a disadvantage. Single battles was basically the most toxic because you can run fusions with 4 health stocks and get away with it. DP battles was also running amok with cheapness. They will pull up a full team of characters and then have Yajirobe as their anchor. But basically, most of the time, people won't even use Yajirobe. They only use him for his most broken and exclusive ability only for Yajirobe himself to use, and that was the Sensu Beam. And with that, he allows his opponent to damage him to a point where he gets to his last health stock. Then, once he gets all of his points, he'll be able to pop a Sensu Bean and he recovers every one of his health stocks. And he'll keep doing it again and again and again and again, basically running away throughout the entire match until he feel like he got what he wanted. He'll switch back to the character that he normally plays to whoop your ass. And this was just downright toxic and atrocious. People stopped having fun because people always find a way to ruin the game for others. But the developers were listening. This was basically a spark of hope, no pun intended. The developers was listening and decided to get to work on patching, reworking, nerfing, and buffing characters. And with that, the patch was an absolute huge success. Yajirobe has been completely annihilated in DP and in singles, depending on if you're going to have the balls to even play that character. Because you got to be MLG Pro to even try playing a weak character like Hercule or Yajirobe or even Master Roshi in single battle. But it still didn't stop the fact that the full power Jiren players after image strike spammers were still running amok. But that one patch where they took down Yajirobe was the beginning of something great for Sparking Zero. The developers was indeed listening, and they were going to do the very best they can to make sure that the game was perfectly balanced. And not only that, the DLC came rolling around. Around mid-January, we finally got our hands on the first DLC wave, that being none other than Dragon Ball Super Superhero DLC, based from the movie. And everyone and their grandmama know dang well that they had to get their hands on some Beast Gohan. For me, I was just hyped for Orange Piccolo because he looks more menacing than Beast Gohan in a nutshell. But that's besides something else. Sparking Zero had is basically his critics' his negativity, but the game's negativity was just out of proportion and basically well over exaggerated because people are just nostalgia blind by the fact that it's not Budokai Tenkaichi 4, it's Sparking Zero, meaning that this game is technically a reboot. But people aren't satisfied with it because they want it to be exactly like Budokai Tenkaichi 3. And they're not wrong about it. There's a lot of stuff missing with the game. Lack of online modes, lack of customizations, and they're right. But people fail to realize that Dragon Ball Sparking Zero has its basically its other criteria that make it better than Budokai Tenkaichi 3. It surpasses its predecessor in its own way. Sparking Zero had a total of 181 playable characters at launch, surpassing Budokai Tenkaichi 3's roster by a milestone. The game featured more characters than that game ever could, spanning characters from Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, and Dragon Ball GT, including the movies like The Tree of Might, The World's Strongest, Cooler's Revenge, and many more. Sparking Zero didn't not only just try to be the best it could be, but it tried to be something that could either be respected and loved in the next 10 to 15 years from now, just like Budokai Tenkaichi 3. But now, during the time, people constantly nitpick it and pick it apart like vultures because it wasn't how it's supposed to be. It was supposed to be just like Budokai Tenkaichi 3. And not every game, or basically not everything, can be pitch perfect. Yes, this game got a few faults and basically some cons. The only problem about Sparking Zero is the fact of the lackluster of offline content such as customizations, offline modes, and etc. But basically that's just little bit stuff that could be added and basically fixed through free updates and patch notes alongside with character nerfs and buffs. That doesn't still change the fact that Sparking Zero still knocked it out of the ballpark and tried to surpass, or well, not just surpass, be something greater than Budokai Tenkaichi 3 could. It's basically this game was technically like a passing the torch. Budokai Tenkaichi 3 passed the torch to Sparking Zero, and in my opinion, Sparking Zero cooked. Beautiful graphics, updated visuals, awesome ultimates. They even added every single character and every single variant of the character, including hell. They even added 2 Gogetas in the game. They added Fusion Reborn Gogeta and Dragon Ball Super Gogeta. Over time, Sparking Zero started to become lackluster due to the fact of the lack of modes, the lack of events, and such, and that is exactly the reason why people stopped playing the game. The game wasn't getting updated as much, like with new content, returning content like costumes and customizations. That would kind of made Sparking Zero less playable and less fun. The only reason why the game was still constantly kept alive was due to the DLC that was carrying. And not many people were also nitpicking with the DLC, despite the fact that they even promised more than 20 playable characters. Basically, we got basically more than that. That's almost 20. We had a total, I think, of 28 in that DLC pack. Hell, they even added Shallot, a character exclusively for Dragon Ball Legends, and people still loved it. And now, basically, Sparking Zero community is just full of hate, nitpicking, and nostalgia-blind people. And people have just failed to see Sparking Zero for what it truly is, a passing the torch game. But people don't see it because they would rather see it as a joke rather than to see a game being respected. But for me, I think Sparking Zero did absolutely well in many things, in gameplay, visuals, and of course, activity. The game was successful. The game sold almost 1 million copies in the less than a week of the launch of it, actually. You can't get any more better than that. And I know someone's gonna comment, oh, there were many other games like that. True, And you are right for that person that's going to comment that. But the fact that this game was able to do it within less than a week, right before it launched, was still amazing. Because Sparking Zero will probably never will live up to the expectations of Budokai Tenkaichi 3. And it never will. Probably may never may not. But if it does, I'm going to come back in the next 10 to 15 years and say I told you so. Because not every game is going to always be pitch perfect. And now, here we are, 1 year later. The game has been updated, the game has been patched, gameplay looks smoother than it already is. They even update visuals and stuff. Hell, they even gave a rework to the Easter egg throw for Broly with Goku mid. They actually reworked his face to make it look exactly like how he was in the Dragon Ball Z legendary Super Saiyan Broly movie. So, in all technicality, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero for me is still fun, still enjoyable, and I'm gonna still continue to play it despite its ups and downs. Because in a way, Sparking Zero wasn't supposed to be Budokai Tenkaichi 4. It's supposed to be a reboot to show you guys that this game is more than meets the eye. After 1 year later, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is still enjoyable. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure you give it a like, comment on what you think about it, and make sure you key blast that subscribe button and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with the Saiyan universe 24/7, 365. Until next time, guys, as Super Saiyan 30 always say, I'll see you guys on the battlefield. And I'll see you guys again as we hit the second anniversary of Sparking Zero. See you guys later.